next speaker is Dwivedi Gopinathan, who is a software engineer by education. He herself has a child with autism, and which inspired her to open a school and a clinic with eclectic approach for children with special needs. After experiencing and learning many approaches, she found the relationship model of treatment as the most effective. Hence, she started integrating it with the rest of the other treatment methodologies. She is a RDI consultant and has many awards and recognitions for her initiatives in the field of creating the most meaningful services and support for children with special needs. Miniji will be sharing her insights on the impact of co-regulation in the development of individuals with autism. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much. Let me just open my. I hope it's visible.
Yes, it's visible, ma'am.
Okay.
Please go ahead.
So, first, I would like to thank the entire team for having me here in the IAFMCON 2022. And I will start from the previous topic where we were just talking about cortisol. And I would like to begin my conversations from there itself. So this is what we will be quickly discussing today, the role of co-regulation in navigating the life every day. How infants understand about their bodies, how the sense of self comes into the picture, and how it connects us to the rhythm of life. And why just focusing on the skill development for a child with autism is not enough. And how can the sense of ease be brought through co-regulation by reducing the stress response? That's why I said that we will start from cortisol itself, where the conversation we were just having. So I will quickly talk about two very important structures of the brain, right orbital frontal cortex and amygdala. Right orbital frontal cortex is required for executive functioning, thinking, decision-making, predicting, impulse control, and other so many things. And amygdala is the structure which is for scoping the threat. Anything. So I have to remain alert all the time to scope the threat, because in the end, we are designed for survival, right? So moment there is a threat, our amygdala sends a signal to the entire body. Oh, there is a threat. And we go into flight and fright. And moment we go into flight and fright, the adrenal glands produce a very important hormone called cortisol. And cortisol, the job of the cortisol is to turn off the stress response. So the cortisol is produced by adrenal glands so that we can come back to the place of ease. But if the cortisol is on all the times, that means my stress response is turned on all the times. It means I am living in a sense of a chronic danger. So cortisol is one of the greatest toxins of the brain. So what happens in the neurodiverse population? I am being overstimulated all the time. And how do I get overstimulated? Lots of instructions. There is a sensory overload. I'm not able to decode the environment around me, right? So there is a noise coming from here, then there's a visual input, and then people are instructing me all the time, same repetitive instructions all the time. And there is a focus on using a skill or developing a skill I do not know how to use. So it really overstimulates my brain, and that creates too much of dopamine, which is a reward hormone. And that moment the dopamine is high, my brain starts creating a lot of BDNF, the brain derived neurotropic factor, right? And that is basically the hormone which is required for neuroplasticity. And because of that, too much of BDNF actually creates too much of cortisol. And when this is the cycle, because every interaction I'm having with my environment is very stressful for me. So too much of cortisol being in the brain all the time damages my brain. So it is a vicious cycle of overstimulation, stress and damage, overstimulation, stress and damage, round and round. So as I told you, for children with autism, the reasons for getting overstimulated is us, the people around them who do not believe in them, those who doubt their capabilities. And we just start believing that my child is not understanding. So we really give a lot of instructions one by one. So as a parent or a therapist, how do I keep my child's cortisol in a balanced state so that it helps them to calm, but not damage them, not damage their nervous system? Cortisol is highest in the morning and lowest in the night. And that's how my circadian rhythm is also maintained. But that does not happen in children with autism. Their cortisol levels keep on increasing. And that's why we see that our children have trouble, difficulty in sleeping, they have sleep disorders. On the contrary, sleeping is required to keep my cortisol low, but my children are not able to sleep. So too much of cortisol actually drains their brain. And then they start using adrenaline for focusing, which is again very damaging for the brain. And it makes kids dysregulated. And that's what we see in our children with autism, too much of dysregulation. So sensory overload leads to high cortisol, which leads to high adrenaline, which leads to too much of dysregulation. And when children are chemically outside the window of tolerance, they need someone to co-regulate them. What they can do on their own, chemically and biologically, they need a human to do that. And that's why the relationship and the co-regulation is the most important thing for our children. Because when there is a relationship, when there is a human in a picture, the most important hormone called oxytocin, which is a chemical of love and connection, is generated. Human beings are wired for social connection, even if we are autistic. So it's a myth that children with autism, they do not want social connection or social coordination. It's purely a myth. Not about won't, it's about can't. They can't have it. They don't have a pathway for that. A sense of peace and ease with social connection comes through oxytocin.
Excuse me, ma'am. There is
Yeah.
something on your slide. There is some mute, share video, something button that's there on your slide. Could you please see that? The Zoom thing?
Sorry, what?
Okay, so there's some screenshot. Okay, that's fine. You could please continue. Yes.
Okay. You can see now? No, but you can see my slide, right?
Yeah, I can see your slide, but there is some screenshot, some Zoom window is actually opened on your.
Is it? Once. Let me just.
Could you
Zoom
please?
window.
So, ma'am, there is a small bar coming on the top, which it got cleared.
This
Uh,
bar? Actually, I don't know.
Yeah, just
Can you drag it away? Yes. That's better. If you can just remove it, that's even better. Or pull it just down, pull it in the bottom.
Okay, fine, I'll do. I'm really sorry. I really do not know how to do.
That's okay. That's okay.
that's okay.
Is it okay now?
Yes, perfect.
Yes.
So, I'm really sorry for that. So where I was, okay. So since it is hard for our children to access the social pathway, they're always in the stress response. So the need for co-regulation and the connection is far more for our children than we can think of. If we already assume that our children do not need connection or co-regulation, then already half of their intervention is not done the way they require it. Deficits in oxytocin is very common in ASD. It impacts new learning and it compromises the neural integrity of the limbic system. And that's the reason we see emotional dysregulation in our children. I also think about dyspraxia here. Dyspraxia is the difficulty or lack of motor planning for a novel task. Now, when I'm always in a high stress response, a novel task, understanding and executing a novel task is very difficult for me because, as I told you, my oxytocin generation is so low. So even for a diagnosis called dyspraxia, where we actually work on ideation and the motor planning and then execution, co-regulation is the most important factor. I'm going to take you to an experiment called the still face experiment, which was done by Dr. Edwig Tronick to see that how the stress of mothers impact children. You can see in the slide that when mom is interacting with the child happily, the child is also very happy. But moment the mom made the still face, a sad face or a disconnected face, please look at how the child's behavior also starts tuning out, how child is getting into so much of stress and how he's trying to get attention of his mother. And then in the last picture, you see the body of the child completely shifting away. And that is gaze aversion. That is where the connection avoidance starts beginning. What interferes with attachment for children with ASD? No, it's not the caregiver. It's again, there was some time where the concept of refrigeration mother was refrigerator mother. Sorry, one second, I just forgot. Sorry. So there was a time when people used to think about refrigerator moms, the moms who are working, because of that children turn autistic. No, it's not like that. Unfortunately, because of the vulnerabilities children with autism are born with, they are not available to use the connection or the nurturing by their parents. So for them, the concept of attachment does not develop. And I will come to it in the end. So what is attachment? Attachment is not the physical bonding between parent and the child, because that's always there. Parents are the most unique people for a child, and everybody love and value their children. Attachment is the ability for a caregiver and a child to create a connection through their relationship, where adults put their mind in the mind of a child and are able to read the communication of the child and responds in a manner that helps the child to make the sense of the world. Because the sensory overload in our children is so high, they need someone to make the sense of the world, sensorily, emotionally, physically. And those with autism, they really find it difficult to manage the nurturing cues in a healthy relationship. Tone, prosody of voice, touch, affect in the face, gestural systems, they are part of sensory issues for them. Especially children with autism, young children I'm talking about, they avoid touch. By the time they become adults, they start understanding touch and they are able to regulate themselves. But children avoid them. And the moment someone tries to come closer to them and touch them, they reject the person initiating it, even if it's a caregiver. And they go into an avoidant mode, leading to a moro or a fear paralysis reflex. Avoidant, hyperextension. My face also got E, my eyes gets expanded, my eyebrows also goes up, my hands becomes completely extended, and my whole body becomes awake. So this is, and that's where, and we see that, yeah, this child is not able to feel the connection through a caregiver. So my regular strategies will not work. I really have to work on co-regulation here, because connection is required for my child to develop. Now I'll come to very interesting neurons called mirror neurons. So how do we connect to our children? As I say, step up your collaboration. And what does it mean? Have you ever wondered that when we yawn, someone else also starts yawning? That happens because of the mirror neurons. Mirror neurons are those amazing neurons that participate in such important processes of learning, empathy, and imitation. They are homed in the right brain, mainly in the right orbitofrontal cortex. Please make note of it, because I'll come to it towards the end, in the right brain. Now, when two people are sitting together, even when they are not talking to each other, the chemical changes happen in the brain. We either connect or disconnect depending upon the state of mind of the other person. So either we go into active flexion, that is connection, or we go into avoidance again, or moro. So I'm quickly going to tell you about mirror neurons. What mirror neurons do? So they are responsible for observation of an action, automatically triggering the stimulation of that action. So the research says that it's not doing of an action, but also observing someone doing it actually fires the neurons in the premotor cortex. And we are able, just by observing, we are able to execute a function. So mirror neurons provide a neural basis for imitation and empathy. And here it's not just about imitation. Mirror neurons are much more sophisticated. It happens, they get fired when there is an imitation with context and intent. That's very important for us to understand the context and the intent that leads to imitation and learning through that imitation. So I'm not just talking about motor imitation or do this or do this. It's not about that. my mirror neurons does not work like that. So even if I'm doing some repetitive patterns, or if I'm doing like this, my mirror neurons do not get fired. But when there is a context, so for example, I'm doing this, you do not know what is the context. But when, if I open the bottle and if I drink water, there's a context. And if you are thirsty, you will be able to observe this and you understand and learn that that's how you drink water. So maintaining the context is very important. Mirror neurons are responsible for developing theory of mind, which is to understand the perspective of the other person. And in the deficits of theory of mind, I can see the behavior, but I do not know what it feels like. So when I'm co-regulating, I'm able to create the context and I'm able to decode the environment for my child. I simplify it so that my child starts making sense of the environment. And that is co-regulation. Joint attention, as we know, in every therapy, the very basic goal is joint attention. Because joint attention is the way the children learn through the eyes of their caregivers about the world. So as the picture shows, if a caregiver is attending to something, my child also automatically starts attending to that thing. So shared attention. It is a basis and foundation of language development, motor development, of learning, empathy, and other foundations of social coordination. And joint attention starts with co-regulation because you need a partner. For joint attention, you need a partner. Without a partner, you cannot develop joint attention, which is the foundation of my social coordination. What is required is guided participation. Guided participation or mindful guiding or a guiding relationship between parent and is very important. And why it is so important? Because the moment we get a diagnosis of our children, we start assuming that no, my child isn't learning. My child doesn't understand anything. So I step into the role of a teacher. I teach everything. I keep on giving the same instructions repetitively without giving time to my child to process the information. In the process, what happens? Children starts losing their sense of competence, their sense of self. They themselves stop believing in them. So a mindful relationship is where I give time to my child to process what I'm saying, to develop joint attention, to understand what I'm trying to uh, point to, give the context visually through gestures, through referencing. So giving that context through joint attention helps my child to start making sense of the world, which is lacking in autism because they are continuously in the stress response. So in guided participation, both the people are active. And as I said, step up your collaboration. It's not about teaching, it's about collaborating. So let's do it together because learning is more by observing rather than telling, so do it this way. So when we do it together, my child is able to see things happening, and because of see happening in the context, and because of mirror neurons, my child will be able to learn it much better rather than being instructed all the time. And that is the beginning point of co-regulation, synchronizing emotions, intentions, and thoughts. Not just clap your hand, look here, look at me, because look at me is just an instruction. It does not translate to anything in terms of eye contact. Because eye contact or referencing is a very, very purposeful thing. It is done to decode the body language and the facial expressions of my caregiver to decide that how do I resolve my dilemma. So it helps me to make sense of the world. It's not just to stare at a person. So the co-regulation helps me to learn through the environment, because that's what is missing in my children with autism. That's the reason we have to make them sit for 40, 50, 60 hours a week and do trials repetitively and help them to learn every single thing. But the implicit learning which we do as humans cannot be learned if someone teaches it even in 4 or 5 lifetimes. 80% of the things we just learn by observing, doing it one time. Only 20% is by learning, which happens through the environment, initiated by someone else. So if my parents have to teach me every single thing 100 times in a day, 1,000 times in a year, I don't think I will be able to learn enough anyways. So I have to help my child to learn through the environment. So we have to find a way to trigger the mirror neurons. And that can only happen when there is a human around, a co-regulating human around. Now, co-regulation begins with the body awareness. The very first thing that happens in our children is to make sense of their bodies, to stay connected to their environment, to stay connected to the space and get the spatial awareness. So now, for example, I'll quickly take you through some small pictures. How my child is born with a sense that when the motor milestones develop, they stimulate their bodies. They go against the gravity, they develop the anti-gravity flexors. See, for example, see the half sit. So how my child is bearing the weight on his palm and pushing his body up against the gravity and developing the muscles. In the second picture, how the child is shifting his weight to one side of the body and developing extensor muscles of my outer trunk and outer core and the inner core. And how this is helping to align his entire inner core and aligning the neck and the eyes, and how my visual system is getting developed because of it. So these are the other milestones: rocking back and forth on the knees to develop the core strength, downward dog to again feel the center of mass of my body, and again weight bearing positions and transfer of my weight to come into various positions. And then how I learn to translate my positions from supine or from downward dog to sitting. First, it's with the support, and then with the balancing and centering act, where now I know how to align my entire body. And this is learning through body. It's very, very important milestones in our children. But unfortunately, our children have this biggest deficit of not understanding their center of mass. They do not have sense of their center of mass. And that's why their body awareness is so poor. That's why this whole experience of embodiment is very, very highly overwhelming for them. They basically do not feel their bodies.
Excuse me, ma'am.
So, yeah?
Yeah, 7 minutes left.
Sure. So, for example, these are the planes of our body: sagittal plane, transverse planes, and the frontal planes. And where these planes meet, that is the center of mass. It helps us to position the body in the space and time. And when our children are lacking it, their entire body awareness and co-regulation is missing. And what they start doing? They start compensating. So they basically shift their center of mass to the places, let it be for speech or for writing or for any other task, coordination, balance, and it gets affected because they use the muscles which are not made for the purpose and they're not effective. So they find it very difficult, and that's why they start resisting a lot of movements and work. So because of the body awareness comes the sense of self and rhythm. So if you see, rhythm is the food for the brain. Cerebellum, which is a structure in the brain for coordination and balance, requires rhythm. So that's the reason whenever children are not connected to the environment, they started having this stereotypical or self-soothing repetitive behaviors like rocking or flapping the hands, because they need it. They need it to organize their brain. So when we say don't stim, they just do not know what to do, how to take their focus on the task they're asked to do, because they need to feel their bodies to be able to do that. Intrinsic rhythm, the connection of the inner and the outer rhythm, is very, very important, which our children do not have. And co-regulation helps to do that, because if we are able to help our children, we set the patterns which are rhythmic in terms of actions, movements, and the voice, the tone of the voice. And when my children is so disconnected, we see the gaze aversion. Gaze aversion is the sign of disconnection. Now, skill development.
5 minutes to go.
Yes, I'm finishing. So skill development is a left brain function. Because the kids are so vulnerable, we become teachers instead of guides, and we just keep on teaching them all the time. It is very overwhelming. And as every instruction is tagged by amygdala as a threat, always upregulating the brain and always going into the cycle of high cortisol and adrenaline. So what do we require to do? We have to connect our children through the right hemisphere, which is the relational brain, which is basically context, intent, emotions. While left hemisphere is all for language, literacy, logic. Now, only the right hemisphere is connected to my limbic system and my brainstem. Only through right hemisphere, through co-regulation, I can help my child to not go into the fight and fight all the time and releasing cortisol all the time. So, and it starts with co-regulation. So I will stop where I started with immune system and sense of ease. So regressive autism happens between the age of 2 and 3 when a lot of pruning of brain is required because of the autoimmune conditions and difficulty in the immune system. The higher cytokine levels are associated with this profile. So cytokines are so involved in the stress response that so many of kids are stressed by their environment because of sensory stresses through sounds or through touch or visual, whatever. So what happens that my sensory systems, they cross talk with my histamine systems also. And sometimes we have seen things like you put a therapeutic listening and we see a hives erupting because of the crosstalk. So if I'm increasing the stress all the time for my child by always instructing, I'm actually enhancing autistic features. But if I'm down regulating the stress with co-regulation, I'm lowering the inflammation and decrease the suffering of the autistic brain, and hypothetically potentially changing the self-regulatory behavior that my child needs to cope up with the inflammation. Thus, co-regulation plays a very big role in the management of stress response also. I will conclude with the note that co-regulation is the process of conscious evolution of the human spirit, and it is always ongoing. Co-regulation lies at the heart of all human relationships. According to the polyvagal theory, it is the reciprocal sending and receiving of signals of safety. It is not merely the absence of danger, but connection between two nervous systems, each nourishing and regulating the other in the process. Because it is baked into our evolutionary past. It is not a desire, but a need. One developed to facilitate the survival. As humans, we therefore are programmed to seek interpersonal connection. It is a biological imperative. Thus, co-regulation is the most impactful process in the development of an individual. With that, I would like to thank the audience.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for knowing autism the way that you have explained. Thank you so much. We have just one question. This is by Dr. Gauri Patil, a practitioner that she has joined. I'm actually seeing many practitioners and many, attendees in the panel right now. How long should the child be actually co-regulated?
As I said, it's an ongoing process.
Yes.
It takes around 6 or 7 months for us to start building those connections again, because most of the work actually is done on the caregivers, because we have already stepped into the role of a teacher or an instructor. So the slowing down process for us takes more of the time. And moment we are able to do that, we become mindful. And if we start co-regulating with them, within 6 months, we have seen tremendous changes that children start co-regulating and they start making the sense of the world around them.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you so much for your insights on co-regulation and autism. It was a pleasure knowing about all of these things. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.